Hey everyone, welcome to another Serie A Fantasy video. Today we're going to be talking about the do's and don'ts of Serie A Fantasy. So a couple of tips I've put together. There's 10 of them overall that'll hopefully help you make better decisions throughout your fantasy season over the 38 game weeks. Please don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. We're almost at 120 subscribers. This has been a great preseason so far. Keep the traction going and let me know what you think afterwards in the comments. So first one to look at is picking your goalkeepers. I have that to do not take two 4.5 million plus playing goalkeepers. Um, that's just a lot of money to put through your team, and you can only use one per week. And ideally, you're picking one. Most goalkeepers will play almost every single week of the season, barring any injuries. Or if two goalies are kind of close, I don't know, maybe if there's a Champions League game, they'll play the backup keeper in the game before or after. So generally, if you have one 4.5 million plus keeper, they're going to be playing all the games in the season, especially if they are from a lower tier team like I have here and like you've seen in my draft Vicario. They're not going to be having any Champions League, likely not going to be in the Coppa Italia as long as some of the bigger clubs. So they will be focused on the league and likely playing their top keeper every single week. I personally like the 4.5 million goalkeeper, so I have more money to put into my squad. And then my secondary keeper is a 4.0 million goalkeeper. If you can find one that plays, that's fine. Having two playing goalkeepers is fine, but make one of them the cheapest price you can. And if you find that diamond in the rough that actually starts, obviously go with them just in case your keeper doesn't play or if they have significantly better fixture that week. Like last year, I had Zoet, who did start the season as a first string goalkeeper for Spezia. Eventually, he ended up getting rotated out, but that was good to bounce between the two. But it was still a 4.0 million goalkeeper, and then I had a 4.5 as well. But to have two 4.5 or greater, especially if they're two premium goalkeepers, that's just not the route to go as far as playing Serie A fantasy. The next one, and it can kind of seem obvious, but some people look to try to build the best possible team every week. And like if that's how you have fun, you just want to see if you can get the highest score every week, I guess that's okay. But ideally, if you're playing over the course of the season trying to get the best rank possible, taking hits every week and more than one hit per week is going to be detrimental to your score, just killing your points, subtracting four each time, right? So you have your one free transfer every week, which I would recommend using unless you bank it and have two for the following week. Um, Otherwise, if you have a lot of transfers to make, use your wild card. And don't worry, you're not going to have a fantastic team every single week. Sometimes your players will have harder fixtures. Sometimes um, they're going to be contradicting each other, and that's just the nature of playing fantasy. If you can avoid it, great. If not, sometimes you're just going to have a below average week and hopefully a better one the next week. The next one I have is don't worry about the bench too much. Me personally, I do like having a playing bench other than the keeper. Sometimes I'll dig really hard to try to find a 4.5 million dollar midfielder that will start. And at least that way I'm not having too much money on my bench, but still having playing a playing bench at the same time. I'd say maybe have one, maybe two decent bench options in case players don't play. But let's remember that we're now in an era where we have five subs per team per game. So even if your player doesn't start, it's probably likely that if you had them in your starting 11, they're a player that's probably going to see the field and they're still going to unfortunately get a lower score rather than a higher one. And that player on your bench won't even get played. So I'd say really focus on having a good starting 11 and maybe one or two playing players on your bench, unless you can search at the lowest price point and find a player that will play at that price point, which is possible. But just don't be having 6, 7 million players on your bench. The next one is not to necessarily chase the differentials. Differentials, in case you haven't heard that term before, are players that likely not a lot of people have in their squad. Why do you think a lot of people don't have them in their squad? Probably because they're not great options. So go with what you're confident with. Even if it looks like everyone has that player, there's a reason that so many people have Immobile in their team. So many people have Theo Hernandez in their team because they're great players and are going to score a lot of points. If you don't have those players, you might fall behind the eight ball early. Um, Now sometimes, especially if you're trying to win a mini league, to choose some differentials at the end in case your team is too similar to the person above you. I get that. I've done it before and it does make sense. But when it comes to the bulk of the season, go with the players that are in form, that are performing, that have good fixtures. Don't try to chase differentials and think that you're going to make up spots that way. Likely doing that is going to drop you further in the ranks. One is omitting teams or players based on your heart. And what that means is if you really hate a team, you're a fan of, let's say, AC Milan, and you hate Inter Milan, which I know is a thing, um, completely closing yourself off to having any Inter Milan players in your team, regardless of the scenario. Same as for me, as a Juventus fan, I'm not going to force three Juventus players into my team just because that's my team. In fact, if I look back, I think my draft, I actually have no Juve players in my squad right now. So closing yourself off based on your heart, um, is can be detrimental to your team. Inter might have a run of fixtures that have is facing three promoted teams where they're likely going to be scoring a lot of points. You might want Lukaku, even if you're an AC Milan fan, or as a Juve fan, if they have four fixtures and three of which are Atalanta, Milan, Roma, I probably don't want Juve, especially defenders in my team at that point because they're probably going to be getting scored on, probably not going to be performing as well. So just be open to having any player in your team at any given point in the season if it makes sense fantasy wise, not just picking with your heart. So when it's spreading yourself thin with premium players, I'd say premium players this year are anything 11 or greater, so anywhere from the 11 to 13 price point, I think is the highest player, which is Lukaku. 10.5, 10 kind of getting in there. Sometimes you can fit an extra one in. But if you right away try to go for the top expensive players, you have Lukaku, Immobile, and Vlahovic in your team all at once. That would already be, let me just quickly do the math here. I think 37 million of your 100 million budget gone right there. And then it's really hard. You still will have, what is that, 12 more players to fit in with under 70 million to go. So it can be, you can start spreading yourself really thin if you have three or more premiums in your squad. And then you're banking on an amazing performance by those premium players every single week because it's likely the rest of your team won't be getting you anything. So that's just something to keep in mind. I would generally say one or two premiums in your team at a time. Um, I don't know if I have really any in right now. I'd say Dybala would be considered a premium midfielder. I maybe have a couple what you would consider to be premium defenders, but they're not in the 11 plus price point. I have a couple 10.5s, so maybe you could see them as premium-ish. But I do not have any of the Immobile, Vlahovic, or Lukaku in my squad right now, which scares me a little bit. Um, and I might think of trying to get one of them in, ideally Immobile. But right now, just with what I want, it's not really fitting. So again, I don't want to spread myself thin by having one of those players in. Sometimes it is good to have at least one in so you can flip between them easier. Like one thing that's weighing on my mind right now is in order for me to get to an Immobile, Vlahovic, or Lukaku, I need to have multiple transfers that I'm ready to make because no one in my squad, the most expensive player in my squad right now, is 10.5. And so I can't do a like for like switch to get to one of the premium players. I will need to find money elsewhere in two different spots and uh, basically demote the value of one player and increase to Immobile, Lukaku, or Vlahovic as well. Transferring too early. Now that's something, especially someone newer to fantasy can do really quickly, especially on the back of a couple bad weeks in a row, is getting really frustrated with a player that hasn't been performing how you want. And right away after that game, still within the game weeks, like the matches are still being played and transferring right away. Um, and so that right away, there's your free transfer for the week. Anything else you want to do is going to be dropping points to do it unless you banked a transfer. And maybe someone else in your squad gets injured or transferred themselves if it's early in the season. And now you need to sit with that player or spend points to get rid of them. So make sure you're patient with your transfers. Make sure all the games get played. Um, so then you know of any injuries that occur. Sometimes there's Champions League, and you're going to have to take that into consideration. Players can get injured midweek, so those are probably weeks where you want to wait till the very end of the week to do your transfers. So then you know that you're not spreading yourself even thin, where you're not going to even have a bench to come in case you need it. During the World Cup, I probably won't be making a transfer for a long time, just in case there's bound to be injuries during the World Cup, unfortunately, in case they happen to any of the players that are already in my squad, because we don't have a wild card during the time. You might use the wild card. You can do transfers if you wild card, because obviously you have unlimited throughout the entire week and not spending any points. But if you only have the one, transferring too early can be detrimental. The only time I'd say it is okay and that I've done it before is if you are literally watching the game and you see that player get injured and you know this is going to be a bad injury, he will not be ready for next week and potentially future weeks, and you want to get ahead of the price drop. That I understand. Sometimes you chase value a little bit. And if that is the sole reason, then that kind of makes sense. But again, I don't think chasing value is the way to win Serie A Fantasy at the end of the day. So be patient. Take in all the information you can. Look at projected lineups before you make that transfer. The next is picking too many new players to the league for game week 1. If you're paying attention, if the manager has set up certain players starting, they've already found their way into the squad. Like, for instance, here, I have Di Maria in the picture below. I do think that he will be in the Juve squad right from the get-go. The transfer happened a while ago. He's been playing in preseason games. I think that he will be starting with Juve right away. That is probably a safe pick. One that I have in my squad right now is Jovic from Fiorentina. He's been doing well in preseason. I do think that he will be there to start this season with Fiorentina. But if you start risking too many of these, not every player gets into the squad right away. And if you have too many of these and these players don't see the field or they're all sub-ins, that can be detrimental to your week. So I'd say absolutely you can take a few. Like I said, I've taken some myself. I have Dybala, who's not new to the league necessarily, but new to his team. I have Jovic. I don't know if I have necessarily too many others that I can think of just off the top of my head. But just be careful with how many you're picking that might not see time or see a significant time in the early game weeks. Pick players that are established starters to their team. For instance, in the picture here, Theo Hernandez, we know game in, game out, is playing 90 minutes almost for Milan all the time. You know Vlahovic is going to be a starter for Juve. You know Tammy Abraham's going to be a starter for Roma. You know Osimhen's a starter for Napoli. So all these players are established in their teams, in favor with their manager, high-end players in their teams. They're going to start. Just be careful how many transfers you're picking in. Using chips too early. So remember, if you watched the last video, we have chips in fantasy, a shuffle, an all-in, and a double captain. If you don't know what those do, please take a look at my previous video that will be shown in a thumbnail at the end. Sometimes people just want to not have to worry about them and they use them right away. And I don't recommend that. I did say a reason to use an all-in chip right off the bat. But I personally won't be doing that. But don't use your chips too early. Plan when to use them. When makes sense. When is there a significant point in the season that I would want to use these chips? For me, like I said, again, check out the other video if you want an in-depth on when to use these. But shuffle, I'm probably going to use after the World Cup. It's like a break in the season up and to account for any injuries that occur over there. Or if we do know of any double or blank game weeks, to use a double captain then or an all-in then or something like that. So make sure you strategize when to use these chips. Don't just throw them around willy-nilly and make it make sense because these can really give a big pump to your total points if you use them at the right time. And lastly, don't just look at the player. Yes, we know Vlahovic is a good striker, but take the fixtures into consideration. Does he have teams like Sampdoria, Cremonese, and Monza coming up, or does he have teams like Inter, Napoli, and Roma coming up. You're much more likely to get more attacking returns against weaker teams than against good teams. So grab players from the teams that, yes, you want them to be good players, obviously, but you want them to have fixtures where they're going to be scoring points as well. Okay, so those are my little tidbits that I have for you going into the Serie A fantasy season. I hope you find them helpful. Do you have any other pro tips that you can share with the Serie A fantasy community? Do you disagree with anything I said? Drop a comment below. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.